years, to the mentorship that I received from many of you, including Dr. Sandra Shannon, that sustained me in doing this kind of research over the past few years. And lastly, I want to acknowledge somebody who never attends conferences with me, but he finally came to this one. That's it. This is very important. My husband, Robert, joined me today. If we are social media friends, you know who Robert is, but all many people have never met him, and so many people don't. People have said to me, I don't think he's real, so he's real. It's also his birthday weekend, so I said, well, come to St. Louis, let's celebrate your birthday, and also this is a very important conference, and I want you to be a part of this, so thank you for coming and joining me, of course. Happy birthday. This is beautiful. Okay, great. All right, let me get started then. So without further ado, I'm going to just present a little bit of my research entitled With Thanks to Nikki, Glenda Dickerson, Afrofuturism, and Black Feminist Theater. 1987 was a flourishing year for Black feminist writers, scholars, and artists. Writer Toni Morrison published her celebrated novel, Beloved. Octavia Butler published her novel, Dawn, which initiated her Lilith Brood trilogy. Black feminist literary critic Hortense Spillers published her oft-cited essay, Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, an American Grammar Book. And likewise, Black feminist theorist Barbara Christian published her influential essay, The Race for Theory, in which she suggests that we read the works of our writers in our various ways and remain open to the intricacies of the intersection of language, race, class, and gender in literature. Also in 1987, Black feminist theater artist Glenda Dickerson delivered her groundbreaking speech, The Cult of True Womanhood, toward a womanist attitude in African American theater at the pre-conference of the Women in Theater program, a focus group for the Association for Theater and Higher Education. With this speech, Dickerson infused a Black woman's voice into the field of theater and performance, while simultaneously theorizing a Black woman's subjectivity. Just as Christian called for a new way to nuance Black women's cultural productions, including fiction, poetry, novels, and etc., Dickerson led the charge in theater to reverse what she identified as Black women being triply locked out by race, class, and history. Dickerson's and Christian's declarations underscores their engagement with the theory of intersectionality, foreshadowing Kimberly Crenshaw's coining of the term in 1989. As I have written elsewhere, Dickerson's critical essays were Black feminist interventions into feminist theater and performance theory, as she was one of the earliest voices to intercede and ensure that Black women had a seat at the table. Moreover, these critical writings illustrate Dickerson's engagement with Black feminist thought and elucidate how she modeled a feminist theater theory through her creative works. Dickerson, along with other pioneering feminist theater artists, reshaped the modern theatrical and dramatic canon and signaled its difference from mainstream male theater. Dickerson's select body of essays prompted white feminist theorists and practitioners to be cognizant of race and class as well as gender in their work and scholarship. Moreover, Dickerson's writings serve a dual function for readers. First, they offer an entryway into her life as well as her creative process as a Black feminist artist. Secondly, they detail her subjective experiences as a Black woman within the professional world of theater and academia. So I have yet to discover any sources where Dickerson employs the framework of Afrofuturism when it comes to her work. However, I'm interested in what is revealed when considering Dickerson's body of work, from her critical writings to her performance work, through the lens of Afrofuturism. Several scholars, namely Tasha L. Womack and Susan Morris, have written on the relationship between feminism and Afrofuturism. Womack writes, quote, Afrofuturism is a free space for women, a door ajar, arms wide open, a literal and figurative space for Black women to be themselves. They can dig behind the societal reminders of Blackness and womanhood to express a deeper identity, and then use this discovery to define Blackness, womanhood, or any other identifier in whatever their form, imagination allows. What one surmises here then is that while Dickerson may not have been a self-identified Afrofuturist artist, she may have been a progenitor of what we now recognize as Black feminist Afrofuturist theater. Womack writes, quote, "Afrofuturists are not the first women to do this. Fine artist Elizabeth Catlett, author Zora Neale Hurston, and anthropologist and choreographer Katherine Dunham, among others, used imagination arts and technology to redefine Black and female expressions. However, Afrofuturism as a movement itself may be the first in which Black women creators are credited for the power of their imaginations and are equally represented as the face of the future and the shapers of the future. Afrofuturism celebrates women like Catlett, Hurston, and Dunham for using the imagination as a space of resistance and establishes a lineage of history of thought. And in this sense, I'm interested in placing Dickerson along that lineage. In Afrofuturism, as Womack would have it, Black women's imagination, image, and voice are not framed by the pop expectations and sensibilities of the day. On Dickerson's part, this was about defining the cult of the true womanhood and using theater as a way to dismantle what she calls, quote, the silenced voice of the woman of color, which fueled her mission to reclaim and recenter Black women's voices and image through performance so that they no longer had to depend on an often distorted illustration. Throughout her essay, The Cult of True Womanhood, for instance, Dickerson evokes the names of early race women, such as Sojourner Truth, Maria Stewart, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, and Zora Neale Hurston. And if any of you know Glenda Dickerson and her work, Zora Neale Hurston was perhaps her most celebrated figure, showing up in all of her work. As well as more contemporary writers, cultural critics, and activists such as Lucille Clifton, Mary Helen Washington, Eleanor Traylor, and Winnie Mandela. Dickerson's essay draws on Black feminist theory and literary criticism. As Lisa Anderson notes in Black Feminism and Contemporary Drama, and LaDonna Forestgreen discusses in Search of Our Warrior Mothers, Women Dramatists of the Black Arts Movement, which is an important book, and some of our own BT members are in that book, so I really encourage you all to take a look at that one. Black feminist theory and literary criticism helped to propel a new critical language that in turn formulated a method to read and analyze Black feminist aesthetics within a plethora of literary and artistic mediums and genres. Returning back to Womack's notion of Afrofuturism's relationship with Black women, she writes, quote, "The Black woman is not held to Middle America's norms, trying to prove that she's not government dependent or aspiring to the beauty ideals in the latest blogs. Nor is there some uniform expectation of Blackness that she is called to maintain. Women develop theories, characters, art, and beauty free of the pressures of meeting male approval, societal standards, color-based taxonomies, or the run-of-the-mill female expectations. The results are works that some critics call uncategorizable. And if you're familiar with Dickerson's body of creative works, you may have wondered just exactly where she fits within the canon of theatrical and dramatic works, as her creative projects have often defied easy categorization. Thus, she herself developed her own terminology for her works, from her miracle plays, to her street performances, to her performance dialogues. Dickerson used material from the real world to create a mythopoetic realm, a theater that embodies history, culture, symbols, dreams, and inspiration. Dickerson's plays combine Greek mythology, African tales, and African American folklore, further articulated through oral narratives, choreographed movements, spirituals, ensemble compositions, and cultural artifacts. Intrinsically, Dickerson's theater has been described as being closely akin to Ntozake Shange's choreo poem. However, according to Taquana Boston and Vera J. Katz, Dickerson was doing this stylistically devised work prior to Shange, quote, drawing on her intense training in choral and oral interpretation, which she learned from Owen Dotson at Howard University. I want to give a nod to Denise. You know, doing that work right now. And combining this with her highly developed sense of movement, Dickerson was perfecting the choreo poem before the term was coined for the famed production for Colored Girls. However, unlike her contemporary Shange, Dickerson never saw her work as a playwright, conceiver, enter mainstream commercial theater. Though Dickerson was well respected within the commercial theater arena, particularly as she was a noteworthy figure during the development of black theater from the 1960s and the black arts movement throughout the 1980s, she opted to create theater for academically inclined institutions and community spaces. As a black feminist theater artist, Dickerson's dramatic works challenged the realist model for drama and centered the black female voice. Dickerson was not only concerned with shifting the subject of theater by bringing black women in from the margins to the center, but she was equally concerned with discovering the methods in which to forge new aesthetic ground and pedagogical ground. As Frida Scott Giles notes, quote, though her university and professional work often called for her to direct realistic plays, Dickerson chafed under the restraint of realism. As she experimented with forms to reflect her ideas, she steadily built a body of work that tended toward the stylized and expressionistic. Dickerson would also come to realize that academic theater allowed her both a space and a sense of freedom to conceive and direct works that were not typically accepted in the mainstream arenas. She says, my vision as a creative artist was firmly rooted in the oral traditions of African slaves, of the masking miming ritual spied on the plantations and the knowledge that in African art, the audience is the chorus. My vision could not be contained in a bedroom, a kitchen. I wanted to lead the choral dance of misplaced people, the flying Africans, and thus experience ecstasy. Accordingly, Dickerson spent much of her lengthy career endeavoring to develop an aesthetic that for a type of theater that was not only black, but most importantly, woman-centered. One of my major concerns with my work on Dickerson is not only how she theorized a black woman's position within the arts, but how she amplified and materialized her theory into practice. Thus, Dickerson's critical essays can be seen as blueprints for how to activate the theory. In her essay, Cult of True Womanhood, for instance, Dickerson laments, quote, gone was the pompous director's gaze, absent the royal director's chair. No more longing to sit among the ranks of directors, Dickerson declared herself a praise singer. A true praise singer, she explains, is a guardian of the archetypes of her culture's collective unconscious. Her function is not to invent, but to rediscover and animate. From this day forth, I will be concerned with the acts and scenes and curtains, but with redemption, retrieval, and reclamation. The chair in which I sit will no longer be called the director's chair, but the blood-bought mercy seat. From that seat, my work will be a mission, my goal will be a miracle. With Dickerson denouncing the patriarchal throne of the director in her pioneering essay, one recognizes that she was one of the earliest women theater artists to reconsider the position of the director and their function through a black feminist lens. So, fast forward to 2001. On September 11, 2001, Glenda Dickerson was at her home in Ypsilanti, Michigan, when she learned of the coordinated terrorist attacks. Dickerson recollects, quote, I raced from telephone to telephone in my house, frantically trying to reach my daughter who lives in New York. Although she was relieved to learn that her daughter Anitra was safe, she was in a state of unrest. Dickerson was struck by the fact that people worldwide experience similar catastrophes routinely. She states, it made me wonder what it must be like for women who live with this kind of terror every day. She shared these thoughts with a colleague who suggested that she consider relating the story to women worldwide who experience loss daily. Dickerson was inspired by this idea, so much so that the day's tragic events eventually catalyzed the Kitchen Prayer series, an unpublished trilogy of performances created in response to 9/11 and the subsequent war on terror. The piece, like Dickerson's more work broadly, remains overlooked, yet an American theater struggling to connect to global currents has so much to learn from it. The triptych comprises 3 works: Kitchen Prayers, Performance Dialogue on 9/11 and Global Loss, Identities on Trial, a Kitchen Protest Prayer, and Sapphire's New Shoe, the Kitchen Table Summit. Devised through a documentary framework, the trilogy employs contemporaneous sources such as news periodicals, broadcast media, tribunal accounts, and other mediums, and presents a diverse array of women's narratives responding to the turbulent nature of violence and war. As a result, Dickerson's Kitchen Prayer series not only commemorates a national tragedy, but uses her performance to propel a platform that intervenes in the discourse of 9/11, global acts of war, and their subsequent effects on women. Dickerson embarked on a journey asking, what is it like for women all around to live with war and terror daily? Dickerson's dramaturgy, as my larger research project argues, travels between the national and the international, creating sites of transformation and transference through a transnational feminist performance praxis. Accordingly, Dickerson's trilogy forges dialogues across varying geographies and penetrates cultural and political boundaries by privileging women's voices across time and space. As I come towards the end of this talk today, I want to focus on the final performance within Dickerson's trilogy, Sapphire's New Shoe, the Kitchen Table Summit. This performance, I contend, is a model of the Black feminist Afrofuturist performance. A culminating performance, Sapphire's New Shoe, a Kitchen Table Summit, premiered October 29, 2004. The final piece within the trilogy, the performance commemorated the 3rd anniversary of the tragedy of 9/11. In her program note, Dickerson writes that while the other two plays within the trilogy, quote, work to give voice to women as diverse as Afghani and Japanese, with the final production, we have returned to our own unique voices, replacing Black womanly images. Sapphire's New Shoe depicts primarily African American women, a mix of historic and contemporary figures such as Condoleezza Rice and Marian Anderson, as well as mythic figures such as Aunt Jemima, who have resisted stereotypical notions of Black womanhood and simultaneously counterattack oppressive conditions by turning their awareness into agency. Dickerson further states that with this performance, she has two objectives. The first is to celebrate Black women who have appeared in some sort of news media throughout unique periods of history, and secondly, to examine the status of Black women post 9/11, thus revealing how the past and the present converge in Bush's America. Marking the 3rd anniversary of 9/11, Sapphire's New Shoe evokes one of Dickerson's earlier works, Remembering Aunt Jemima, a minstrel show. Co-written with Green and Clark in 1992, Remembering Aunt Jemima resuscitates minstrel form to examine Black women's subjectivity while simultaneously shattering myths that converted into stereotypes of and about Black women. Although Sapphire's New Shoe focuses significantly on Black women throughout history, the performance also conjures a transnational feminist praxis. For instance, the cast of characters range from the Beaumorte sisters in Latin America and Middle Eastern Asian women who contemplate head coverings post 9/11. Dickerson's inclusion of women of various racial and ethnic backgrounds foregrounds her commitment to a Black feminist project, a project whereby the core tenet is to reach beyond the U.S. borders, for women's issues are global. The play takes place at the fictional Mama Rice's house on the Gulf shores of Alabama on September 11, 2004. In addition to marking the anniversary of 9/11, the play is also situated during the midst of Hurricane Ivan, which is referenced throughout the play. The staple figures who remain throughout the entirety of the play are Mama Rice, Aunt Jemima, Condoleezza Rice, Constance Rice, Contrary Woman, and Bone Woman. The prayer performers, whom Dickerson called her cast, transform into other characters with costumes throughout the play. As each of the women show up to Mama Rice's house, the audience is given a brief history lesson about her through direct narration from the character herself. The history lesson that each of the women brings with her is intertwined into a larger conversation, or rather a kitchen table summit, that covers a range of topics from women's hair care products and American enslavement to voting rights for women and the tragedy of 9/11. Sapphire's New Shoe, and this is why it's good to read, because I see I'm repeating something here. Oh, okay. Yep, that's why it's good to read.
Go ahead, baby.
I want to skip down. Okay, here we go. So, let me get back to Afrofuturism. Just as writer Octavia Butler imagines her characters as vulnerable to constraints similar to those faced by people in communities that are marginalized because race, gender, sexual orientation, and ability, Afrofuturism, Susanna Morris argues, illuminates epistemologies that do not suggest utopian panaceas, excuse me, but instead underscores the importance of transgressive manifestations of family and intimacy, epistemologies that ultimately present possibilities for our own decidedly unenchanted world. Borrowing Morris's analysis of Butler's work, I too see Dickerson's work as Afrofuturist feminism in several ways. Her texts are committed to portraying complicated and sometimes vexed histories of people of color and visions of the future with people of color at the center, with a particular emphasis on women of color. Dickerson's creative works are fundamentally interested in critiquing conventional systems of power and dominance and offering futurist solutions based on cooperation and egalitarian ethics. For Dickerson, the futurist solution is to create a mythic world that is a world outside of realism, where Black women of the diaspora converge and talk. And for time, I'm actually going to skip this chunk here. I talk a little about bell hooks and the importance of talking back and the importance of seeking Black women's voices and so forth. I'm going to skip a little bit of this because I wanted to get to the performance here. Ultimately, I argue that recognizing Afrofuturist feminism offers a critical epistemology that illuminates the functionality of the creative and performing arts. In short, sometimes it is the simple act of talking, particularly for Black women, that can be liberating. Yes. Even more, Dickerson's creative works advocates transgressing repressive social norms and rejecting heteropatriarchy while centering or creating a variety of experiences from across the Afro-diaspora, thus underscoring a commitment to an equitable vision of society. It does not resort to simply offering up utopias. Another way this happens for Dickerson is the honoring of ancestors. In Sapphire's New Shoe, for instance, the prayerful performers honor the ancestors whose remains were exhumed after the discovery of a lost African burial ground in Manhattan. After being exhumed and studied, the remains were reinterred in a section of the city block now designated as the African Burial Ground Visitor Center. The prayerful performers also honor those who have been left in mass graves worldwide. As Bone Woman declares, restless spirits deny decent burial. Aunt Jemima sings, will the circle be unbroken? As the remaining performers list off and sink, Atlantic Ocean, Iraq, Zanzibar, Kosovo, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Liberia, Bosnia, Nigeria, Rwanda, Guatemala, El Salvador, Chile, Argentina, Georgia, and Ground Zero. And here I'm going to ask if we can show the clip a little bit, and we can see that in action.
Give me the computer shifted, so give me 1 second.
I think it's muted in this app here. All the way to the right.
Tell us again, remind us what we're...
So this is a clip from Sapphire's New Shoe, the final performance within the trilogy.
And this is near the end, this is...
Sort of near the end, this is the moment where she's honoring the ancestors and she's talking about the importance of ancestral burial grounds.
And where came the recording from?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Where came the recording from?
This is from her Kitchen Prayer series, which is housed in the Lavity Collection at the University of Michigan.
Say it again.
This is housed in the, this performance comes from Linda Dickerson's Kitchen Prayers archives, housed in the Lavity Collection at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So my slideshow is going to sort of go over that, a little bit of that as well. But while we're waiting for this to come up, I'm going to get to the final portion of the paper, and then we'll watch this, and we can sort of open up for a little bit of discussion here. So, as Sapphire's new shoe comes to a close, the prayerful performers declare a line derived from remembering Aunt Jemima. Quote, "It's a goddamn shame what they did to me, but I'm here to tell you I'm goddamn free." Before the stage lights fade to black, the prayerful performers turn around, lift their skirts, and expose their bare bottoms to the audience. This final act of resistance by the prayerful performers is borrowed from the women of Swaziland, a region in southern Africa. According to Giles, this act in Swaziland is a show of denunciation of the failure of their leaders to govern wisely. In performing this act, the prayerful performers demonstrate their resistance to historical acts of oppression, underlining that the solidarity of women across the world can initiate and solidify peace and justice. Thank you.
I'm here to Libya. I know it. I know it's true. I know it can happen. You can't do this for as long as I have, and I know the truth. You feel it in your bones. We'll be right back. With the next big thing, a new children's book about Marian Anderson.
In this clip here, she's mimicking Oprah.
Thank you.
I say to that Undertaker, please drive slow. For that lady you are hollering, Lord, I hate to see her go. Oh, follow close behind her, try to hold up and be brave, but I could not hide my sorrow when they laid her in a grave.
And the mass graves worldwide, restless spirits denied decent burial. Atlantic Ocean, Iraq, Zanzibar, Kosovo, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Liberia, Bosnia, Nigeria, Rwanda, Guatemala, El Salvador, Chile, Argentina, Georgia, ground zero, Atlantic Ocean.
And largest mass grave.
Iraq, come down in cold blood. Zanzibar, stench that will not float. Kosovo,
The place was described as an evil place.
Cambodia,
She cried until she died.
Sri Lanka, bring his body to me. I will recognize his bones. Bosnia, you can smell the dead bodies. Oh, Nigeria,
They buried him alive.
Rwanda,
Skulls and holes in the back of the head,
Guatemala,
as if they had been shot.
El Salvador. The crying was disturbing at first. Chile. Woo! Everything is dark gray as Argentina.
Desperate families try to dig up the site themselves.
Georgia.
It's like deja vu all over again.
Yes. All have their own individual histories, but together testify to decades of mass murder. Ground zero. And Sister Sartia holds them all to her bosom. Marked in Europe of old as the hot top Venus Sartia is home. But at last, if the ancestors of our buried, we cannot be blessed. Sarti Martin, Sarti is a mighty spirit that brings mighty, mighty blessings their way. You know, a group of women sang her praises, calling her sister ancestor, sister to the sun, sister to the sun, sister to the moon, sister to the moon, to the stars, to the stars. Sang the song of childhood in the fair.
Thank you. I thought it was important that this is the clip that I often show when I'm teaching this play to my students. It's a clip that I've seen it maybe 100 times and I get quite emotional every time I see it, right? Glenda's work will do that to you. If you're interested, in the beginning of this performance, Glenda offers an overview of the play, and she's talking to the audience, and one of the members of the audience is Margaret Wilkerson, who's in the audience. And at that moment, she says, Margaret has her cane. She says, somebody go in the back and let Mama Rice know that we're going to use Margaret Wilkerson's sanctified cane. And so, you know, created that kind of transition, that honor in that moment. So I'm just gonna, can we hit the next slide? I don't have a clicker, no. So really quickly, my work, this work began with my dissertation project when I graduated from the University of Maryland in 2018. And at first I thought it was going to be a critical biography on Glenda Dickerson. And then I started doing more reading, and I started to realize that critical biographies, not only are they hard to write, but I often wonder, can we really write a critical biography of someone? And as opposed to doing that, why don't we honor that work? And so I began to look at the work as opposed to simply the person, but put the person in competition with the work. A few things really quickly. Glenda Dickerson died in 2012, and for those of you who knew her, it was quite sudden, right? Unexpected loss. She was an important director, conceiver, playwright, pedagogue. Second black woman to direct on Broadway with Reggae and Musical Revelation. One of the producers right here in the room is Mr. Woody King with us? I think I saw him. As my work argues, she was a pioneer of Black feminist theater, and towards the end of her career, a professor at Spelman College, and chair of Spelman's theater arts program. And during the time of her passing, she was a professor of theater at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Next slide, please. My work looks largely at how her career traverses from the 1960s throughout the Black arts movement to 2012. And really, I argue that she was a central figure of the Black art movement, particularly in the Washington, D.C. area. One of the pioneers of Workshop for Careers in the Arts, which eventually turned into the Duke Ellington School for the Performing Arts, the D.C. Black Repertory Company, the Black American Theater Company in D.C. And really, I sort of also talk about how she began in the 1980s to really direct and conceive works by Black women playwrights. And she was the director that would be called to direct the works by many pioneering and at that time burgeoning Black women playwrights. And these are just some of those plays here, right? So we have No by Alexis DeVoe. We have Mom Lou's Daughter by Gertrude Greenwich. We have Black Girl by J.E. Franklin. Aisha Rahman, P.J. Gibson, Marion Warrington, Shea Youngblood. These are some of the women that Linda Dickerson was in relationship with. Really centering their works, and in many ways I would argue if she did not direct their works in the 1980s and early 1990s, many of their works would not be known and or anthologized. And these works are anthologized, get your copy, teach them, most importantly, stage them. One or two more clips. And so these are some of her essays, her critical essays where, my larger argument about making this Black feminist intervention in feminist theater theory of the 1980s and so forth. So check those out. And I think there's one more slide that I want us to get to. This is what I was talking about earlier in terms of some of my research and the work. Her Kitchen Prayer series, which is housed in the Labadee collection. Is that my phone? Housed in the Labadee collection at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And for this research, for the past couple of years, I interviewed about 22 people in New York, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., Maryland, and tons and tons and tons of telephone interviews. And I do think the last slide is next, I promise. Yes, and so these are just some of the folks that I interviewed. Ironically, I went to grab something to eat yesterday. I was really, really hungry. And I was sitting and I said, oh, that's Woody King over there. And so I got up and I walked up and I said, Mr. King, you may not know who I am, but I interviewed you a couple years ago on the telephone about Linda Dickerson. He goes, hey, I remember you. And I said, I just want to say thank you for your work. So Woody King is one of the folks, Debbie Allen, Leonard Gorbat, Robert Hook, Sorette Scott, and many, many other people, including some of the people in this room, including Kathy Irving, Beth Turner, Kathy Perkins, Sidney Mahoney, many, many people, including her family, and other people that have worked with her. And so my goal is to submit the entirety of the project in the fall, and eventually this book will be out. So yeah, looking forward. So Professor Irving just told me to take some questions. We can open up for a conversation. Yeah, questions, comments, responses.
Is there any way you can go back to some of those slides, or is there a way that this presentation can be readily available to us online, or?
Not yet.
Okay.
This is my intellectual work. Not yet. But I can send it to you. I won't post it. But I mean, I can send it to you.
Okay.
For you to utilize, but I don't post it. I'm still working.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh yes, of course. However, the performances are readily available. They are now digitized, and you are able to see the performances through University of Michigan's Special Research Collections website. And I also would encourage you to take a trip to the archive to see the abundance of materials there. I saw a hand over here.
The same question. I was going to ask if you could put your speech on the document pad and do that.
No. I can't do that yet. But, the writers in the room, you know how that is. Not yet. However, what I have published several articles on Glenda Dickerson, and they are available. Some of that mentioned, some of the things I mentioned today, some of this is new work, so some of the works are out there. And I have another article that's coming out this fall in Theater Journal about the Kitchen Prayer series that talks a little bit about what I presented on today.
Great work, brother.
Thank you.
Question, where was that performance?
University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Each of the performances took place on campus.
Okay. It was somewhere on there. I thought I knew. I was just
You
making sure.
probably do. There's some of those folks are well known. For instance, the woman who played Bone Woman. I remember I was watching that show, The Good Lawyer, The Good Doctor, The Good Fight. And I was watching her and saying, I know her. This is when I was in graduate school. I said, I know her. And one day I was in the library doing my writing, and I said, and I put two together, and that's her. If you were a performer between the late 1960s and let's say maybe 2000, and you did, black theater, and you were a playwright, most likely you knew Glenda and or Glenda worked with you. And if you were someone in the 1980s and early 1990s and you made it, Glenda most likely had something to do with it, whether you know it or not. Dr. Shannon.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Now that I know you've had experience with 2 archives, doing research in 2 archives, can you talk about the treasures in Glenda's archives, not versus, and August Wilson's archive?
Yes, I can talk about both of them. Dr. Shannon and I, we had the pleasure of being some of the earlier folks to go into the newly acquired August Wilson archive at the University of Pittsburgh. And really, Dr. Shannon actually shepherded that project, and I was one of the first people who. And so, I love archival research, which is one of the reasons people ask me all the time, when is your book coming out? I'm like, archival research is not simply theorizing when you write something and publish it. It takes a while to really sort of capture and go through archives, especially when there's 500 boxes and or more, right? One of the things, so Glenda Dickerson, I'm gonna talk about Glenda Dickerson for a second. One of the things that a lot of folks don't know is that Glenda Dickerson only had one published play, and that was Aunt Jemima. And the reason for that is because of the kind of work that she did, right? This kind of stylistically devised work. Glenda was very much, and Keith was talking about this last night, Glenda was very much about process over product. So for instance, one of the things that I learned during some of the early archival research with regards to Glenda's work is that she did not necessarily write scripts and come to rehearsal and say, here's the script, pass them out, and let's begin to rehearse. She would be sitting in rehearsal and she would say, so I'm using Professor Herbert, she would say, Kathy, so last night when you read something, what you were watching, what did it spark? And you'll say, well, I was thinking about my mother, and I was thinking about this, and she'll go, okay, I need you to say that in this moment, now get up there and say that. Now let's try next. What did you think? And that's how she would create, right? This early form of devised performance. And it's funny because when you talk, like, for the theater scholars in the room and the professors in the room, when we're teaching devised performance, we're often thinking about it from a European context. But Glenda Dickerson was doing this kind of work since the 50s and 60s. Black artists have always been doing this kind of work, devised performance. And so it's important to include black artists, right, within the conversation. And so she did, so my point is that she did not, write, what we consider to be conventional scripts. So when I got to the archives, part of what took me so long in writing an early draft of this is that I had to go through her handwriting and then match it with what was being performed on the screen, right? And try to figure out if these matched up. And it takes time, right? But that's that dramaturgical work that I like. A lot of people get alone in a room by myself with coffee. But it takes time, right? But I think what it really does is, to Dr. Shannon's question, it opens up, right? Not just simply the possibilities of archival research, but it sort of illuminates the process of an artist. And it sort of gives you the overview of what makes this artist, not simply spectacular, but different, and how they differ from what other people are doing, right? Similar to August Wilson's archive, he did not throw anything away. We haven't learned that recently. And one thing I discovered, I was there 2 weeks ago during a workshop, I discovered that if you all know Fences, the play Fences, there's Alberta, who has the baby body, right? That whole situation. There's a scene that was cut, I discovered a few weeks ago in the archive, that was cut from the original draft of Fences, where there's a scene with him in Alberta in her apartment. And, right, there's also a couple scenes with a third son that he ended up pulling from the original script. And so why is that important? Because again, it opens up and it gives us sort of a purview into what they were thinking, even if it doesn't make it into the final draft, right? Yeah, so. Hey, friends.
Hi, I'm Rochelle from Detroit.
Oh, microphone.
Hi, I'm Rochelle from Detroit. Fantastic.
Thank you.
I like books.
Thank you.
I will get your book when it comes out.
Thank you.
But do you have any idea or intention or even an inkling of possibly making a documentary out of this? An actual film?
So I do have an interest, and I have some friends I've been working with about not just simply a documentary about Linda Dickerson, but a documentary about Black women playwrights. So thinking about, going back to Angela Grimke, Georgia Douglas Johnson, and sort of all the way up to where we are today with our contemporary playwrights. We need one. I know there were several documentaries. There was one that was coming out about Black women directors, and I know that Chanel Perry was at the center of that documentary. I don't think it ever came out or was completed. I'm not sure, but we know the documentaries take time, right? I'm interested in the documentary on Black women playwrights in particular. I also know that it takes funding. And we can get the funding, right? But I just got to finish one project before
And my second question had to do with whether there should be a mounting of this production again.
So Linda, so this is another, so to tie in with Dr. Shannon's question, Linda Dickerson, in the introduction, in her overview that she wrote for the archives, was that she wasn't necessarily interested in people remounting the performance here, right? She was interested in allowing her performance to be a model for what can be possible. So let me give a little bit of clarification. In my larger project, I talked deeply about this notion of performance dialogue. So in the performance, Linda Dickerson, she gets away from the typical, curtain or black box performance where you come in, you sit down, and you watch it. During these three performances, particularly commemorating 9/11, right, there are moments where the performance will stop in mid-performance, and they'll go to someone and they'll say, well, where were you when 9/11 happened? And you would get up and you would share your experience, and you would talk about your experience with 9/11, war, the subsequent war and terror, and so forth, right? And what she was aiming for was to recognize how audience members very much are participating in the making of the performance with their own narrative, right? And so for her, what was important was not simply watching the performance, but how can this performance become a model for some. So for instance, a lot of us are doing that work with COVID, Hurricane Katrina, right? So how do we use her work as a model rather than simply aiming to, just restage her works? And she talks about that significantly. And there was an essay that was published a few years ago in Black Mass, I forgot the author's name, who talks about using Dickerson's kitchen presses as a model, and he did that kind of work.
Thank you.
Khalid, thank you so much. Appreciate the abundance that we have. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for reminding us of this early Afrofuturist. This is somebody that was way out ahead of everybody. Right? At this time, Monica Ndulu has joined us. I'm going to invite her up to tell us a little bit about the International Black Theater Summit.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How y'all doing?
All right. Wonderful.
I planned to be in here with you earlier, but I worked out this morning, and I didn't want to come up here in my workout clothes. So thank you so much. I'm not going to keep you very long, but I did want to say, number one, thank you to BTN for all that you're doing and for having us. Let you all know that at the end of this event, starting on Sunday, July 23rd, going into July 24th, we will be convening the International Black Theater Summit satellite event. What is the International Black Theater Summit? Well, we launched the 2018 International Black Theater Summit at Dartmouth College, and it was a celebration and reconvening of the 20th anniversary of the 1998 National Black Theater Summit that August Wilson convened at Dartmouth, where we invited many of the folks who were either part of the executive committee that organized the event or attended, along with folks working in the field, stakeholders in the field, in order to sort of take the pulse of where we are, or at least where we were in 2018. Well, what's happened since then, and the thing with the International Black Theater Summit, we expanded the scope to go beyond Black theater and really look at Black storytelling across platforms. So our goal is to strategize the future of Black storytelling across platforms with Black theater at the core. All of you are invited to be a part of the International Black Theater Summit, whether it's the satellite event, which is a smaller, more focused event, or the bigger event on Sunday evening at the Mixer. I'll let you know where we're going in 2025. You don't want to be there. So thank you all so much. Again, I am Dr. Monica Whiting-Dunu. I am happy to speak with you at any time. So definitely, you can pull me aside, and there are some of my colleagues are already here from the Craft Institute, which convenes the International Black Theater Summit. Others will be arriving on Sunday. So feel free to pull us aside and ask questions. We want to talk to you.
What's the Craft Institute?
Craft Institute. The Craft Institute is a nonprofit dedicated to curating culturally inclusive ecosystems throughout the world of arts and entertainment. We do this by transforming formal training and industry practices while promoting equitable access. So it's really about work. It's for us, by us, and we try to activate the various ideas, really the legacies of Black theater, and imagining what the future is going to be. So the thing that I want you to know, why we want you to be a part of it, is because we believe that each and every one of you has expertise that will contribute to the beauty and brilliance and the future of Black storytelling across platforms, again with Black theater at its core. So bring your gifts and let's organize them so that we can all work smarter and not harder. Thank you so much.
11:45, the buses will depart. Downstairs, you have approximately a half an hour before we take off for the rest of the day, which is at Washington University. Thank you so much. Can I please see my students over here on this side of the room? All of the young scholars, hearing awards, monologue, and the Mabel P. Robinson Award. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you at Washington.